that single disc, $5 would update your set. So you don't have to buy a whole new set. Just one disc will do for you. And there's also a disc on the times of Daniel 11 and 12, which deal with the 1290 and 1335. I'm not going to cover that here. I will run out of time, guaranteed. And so that won't be here, but there are a few of those discs over there. All the individual discs are $5, so that's really easy. They don't even have to look at which one you're taking. They just look at, you got a disc, it's $5. And the other one there is questions Seventh-day Adventists ask, and that deals with Ellen White, etc., in Daniel 11. Speaking of Ellen White in Daniel 11, I'm not going to have time in the 3 presentations to cover it. So they told me if anybody wants to cover it, you can meet me here this afternoon and I'll cover Ellen White and Daniel 11. All we have to do is figure out when. Between 1 and 2, I'm involved in a Zoom call with a different conference. Not my own, just a different conference that wants to do some work together with us. So I have probably between 2:30 and 5, anytime in there for a half-hour, 45-minute presentation on Ellen White, and any question and answers you may have. Preference on time. Anybody have a strong preference? Otherwise, I'm going to pick one. That's today. You do not want to meet me at 4 o'clock or something on Friday because you'll be in an airplane with me. I'm not paying for it. Okay, if no preference, it's 4 o'clock today, right here. All right? That way, somebody can be doing something else early afternoon and be on the way back in. All right, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful for your presence again. Thank you for what you've already done and what you will do. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, here we go. For those who understand Daniel 2 and 7, you've already figured out all we're doing is expanding it. Those are the kings of the north. And Daniel 11 only adds the kings of the south. Babylon came from the north. Medo-Persia came from the north. The Greek Empire came from the north. Greek Empire split into 4 parts. Daniel cared about 2. Seleucid north, Ptolemy south. God's people get caught in the middle. And to this day, Jerusalem and God's people are caught in the middle. Rome came in from the north, and that's the time of Jesus. Then the Roman Empire splits 10 ways, but Daniel only cares about 2 in chapter 11, north and south. Islam hits from the south, papacy strikes back in the Crusades from the north. By the way, all 3 conflicts, Islam hits first. The king of the south always hits first. The king of the north retaliates. Isn't it interesting? Islam and the radical left are pushing traditional Christianity into a response. We're just in the 3rd round. The day of worship shows that it is a global religious application. The day of worship for Jerusalem is Sabbath, and for God's people it is still the same. The king of the north changed it to Sunday, the king of the south changed it to Friday, and God's people get caught in the middle everywhere on this planet. So it's both literal and global religious. 3 conflicts. Daniel 11:29, at the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former, which is the first one, the appointed the second one, or the latter, the time of the end one, which is the same as the 3 woes of Revelation. And so that would give you, the red line is the papacy, the black line, the 3 conflicts with Islam, and the blue line is the power out of the French Revolution and Marxist socialism, basically, the radical left. And right now, they are working together. We covered that somewhat yesterday. Some of you get it tomorrow morning. But that's okay. Just understand that I'm looking at the radical left and radical Islam as a unit, as allies, and I'll explain why tomorrow for you. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. Interesting thing, in all of the two previous conflicts, the king of the north and king of the south have a fight, and the king of the north goes back to his home territory and causes trouble for God's covenant people. In the third conflict, he doesn't go back home to cause trouble. He does it globally. This conflict, what you see in history, will now just mushroom to cover the whole earth in the third round. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries. The land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. So you have radical Islam, Egypt and many countries go down. And if you didn't know this, modern radical Islam was born in the 1920s with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Egypt is the birthplace of modern radical Islam. And so Daniel has Egypt going down and many others. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, western Jordan, those are those that escape. They escape by trusting in Jesus Christ. And then you have those who follow, Libya and Ethiopia. They follow the king of the north. So Islam splits. Some Muslims follow. I was just thinking the way I telling moms this. I get the adventure of going into mosque quite often with my brochures that look an awful lot like this. And they've been mailed out to a city, and I know the moms and the Muslims have it. And if I was them, I'd be thinking this is an attack on Islam. And so I go to the mosque on Friday. I'm starting Friday night. I don't want a protest at the mosque on Friday night. I mean at the meetings on Friday night. I want them to come as friends. And so I go and I hand them this brochure, and I said, you guys probably got this in the mail. Mm-hmm. And if I were you, I'd be thinking this is could be a attack on Islam. And I said, I'm the presenter of this, and I'm here to tell you it's not. It's going to show how both Islam and Christianity are in Bible prophecy, and it will talk about the good and the bad of both sides. Actually, I'll talk more about the challenges of the Christian side than the Muslim side. You may want to show up and listen in, and then you can go challenge the Muslim side. Radical Islam will be divided three ways according to the prophecy. Radical Islam will go down, and by the way, most Muslims in the U.S. are okay with that. They don't like radical Islam. Once in a while you hit a radical Islamic mosque, and then it's a little different. And then I say, many Muslims will follow papal-led Christianity. And I look at them and say, whatever you do, don't follow the Pope. And they look at me like, who are you? And I said, but there will be some Muslims and some Christians who will truly follow God in this last crisis. Now they really want to know who I am. And I just tell them, remember, I'm a true person of the book. I don't drink alcohol. I don't eat pork. I do not worship on the Crusader Day of worship, and I believe in the whole book, not half of it. I'm a person of the book and follow Jesus. It's so much fun to watch them trying to figure that out. And but literally, I walk into mosque, within 5 to 10 minutes, I'm a friend with them with this material, unless it's a radical mosque. And then I'm really happy to walk out on my own power. And that's happened once. One other mosque that wasn't radical, there was a radical there that was informing me that I should die. The mosque leadership said, don't listen to him. You ever been involved in a church that had some ornery people in it? Mosques are the same. You know, I've been taken out to lunch by the leaders of the mosque. By the way, it's really easy to eat at Golden Corral with some mosque Muslim friends because they go through line, they're questioning them, what's in everything. I just follow through and I'm laughing. I said, this is really easy. I don't have to worry about getting pork at all in anything today because I'm just listening to you guys. Have fun and make friends with Muslims, okay? It's going to take relationships to turn the tide on that. But anyway, so radical Islam goes down, moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity, and some Muslims and some Christians join together to proclaim the loud cry. Oh yeah, we're going to have allies too. And radical left goes down with radical Islam, moderate left follows papal-led Christianity, and some out of the left follow Jesus in the Bible. On the right and traditional Christianity, they either follow the Pope or they follow Jesus in the Bible. Thankfully, there's people that go with Jesus in the Bible from all the groups, so don't you ever get the idea you can look at another group and think they're all bad. All right? Now, definitions that you need to know for this presentation. A caliphate. It is ruled by a caliph who claims both global and religious authority. Religious and political authority globally, all right? It's kind of like a pope. A religious authority who claims political authority globally. Oh, as far as the caliphate, at the end time, they believe the capital of the global caliphate will be in the city of Al-Quds, which you know by another name, Jerusalem. Let's see, if all the radical Muslims in the world want to make Jerusalem their capital, do you think there's any possibility that Jerusalem could get caught in the middle? I didn't know that piece when I started teaching this. And then when I realized Al-Quds was Jerusalem, I thought, yep, this is almost guaranteed. All right. Islamists, those are the radicals who want to bring about a caliphate by force. And in Al-Quds. And names that you might recognize that this would include: the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey wants to be the caliph, Iran, and others. Oh, that would include Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, groups like that. Okay, so that gives you an idea of those. The moderate Muslims are those basically who have been signing on to the Abrahamic Accords. Facing radical Islam, some of these Muslim countries would rather be friends with Israel than radical Muslims like Iran. Boy, was that a change in the Middle East. But radical Islam has been making interesting things happen. The Daniel 11 split is obviously on. In 2011, the review shocked me by agreeing to publish our book. And when that book came out, it not only talked about history, it moved forward in what to expect in the future. And this drove some of our Seventh-day Adventist theologians crazy that we would actually say what would be happening. But in 2011, these were the expectations. Radical Islam would anger the papacy. The papacy would call for war against radical Islam. The United States would be the military enforcer for the papacy. Radical Islam would be overthrown, moderate Islam would follow papal-led Christianity, and some Muslims would follow Jesus in the Bible. The only thing that was happening at that point, really, were that some Muslims were beginning to have dreams and visions. That's an awesome thing, isn't it? There are some in this room that have recently personally listened to Muslims tell about those dreams and visions. I always enjoy it when I get that opportunity to have those one-on-one conversations with Muslims that have talked to Jesus. But 1 through 5 for sure weren't happening. But what good is a book on Bible prophecy if you're not willing to lay out where it's headed? But by 2014, in sequence, the events hit. Which would tell, if you were me, would that make you a really stronger believer if you go out on the limb and say, here's what's going to happen, and then it happens? Yeah. And so I'm now going to show you in date order as the whirlwind unfolds. July 1, 2014. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. So on day one of the Islamic State, by the way, the Islamic State is claiming to be a caliphate. Their intent was to go global. Notice, around the globe. Day one of their existence, what was their target? Rome. You know, I was expecting, that there would be a push, but I wasn't expecting on day one that they would name Rome as their target. Very convenient. So day one, we now have a functioning caliphate for the first time since the Ottoman Empire. Now, if this is really it, you're going to have the king of the north call for military action or war. Just like the Crusades and the Holy League. The first two rounds had a papal call for military force. How long would it take the Pope, the man of peace, to call for war? It only took 5.5 weeks. August 7, 2014, Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. The Pope called for action. Well, I can remember that date very well. Do you know where you were on September 11, 2001? Burned into your memory probably, right? It's burned into my memory where I was on August 7. It was so frustrating. I was at an ASI convention, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Why would that be frustrating? Because I am watching a major fulfillment of Daniel 11 in front of me. And nobody seemed to care. At an ASI convention with really good Adventists all around me. Why didn't they care? Because they're not studying Daniel 11. If it was a Sunday law, they would have been excited. But I'm here to tell you, if you wait for a Sunday law, you're going to wait too long to wake up. God gave other early warning signals, and we better be paying attention to them. But nobody seemed to care, except one man. A guy by the name of Robert Falkenberg Sr. That day became a believer of Daniel 11. And from then until his death 2 years later, we were back and forth in contact. We were on each other's speed dial pretty much. And he was my mentor dealing with general conference kind of issues. And he did his best to make sure that people listened to this. It was a good day in that sense that Robert Falkenberg had his attention gathered. But the media started saying, well, the very next day, Obama says America is coming to help. How long did it take the United States to hit the target called for by the Pope? 36 hours. We have the caliphate formed. It's going to take out Rome. The Pope comes out and says, we need action. The United States supplies it. Just bang, bang, bang. That's 3 into the list, just like that. But the media started saying, oh, the United States jumped the gun. The Pope didn't really want military action. He wanted humanitarian action. He's the man of peace, after all. So the Pope sent out his ambassadors in the next couple of days after that to explain, no, he really did want military action, which would be putting us in the third conflict. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, top ambassador, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. Boy, they're admitting that this is exactly the scenario of Daniel 11. You have the Islamists, the king of the south, that wants Jerusalem. They're pushing and they're forcing the papacy to come out swinging and their allies. Wow. That tells me we're at the beginning of the third conflict. After that, Jihadi John calls Obama the dog of Rome. The Pope said sic 'em and the U.S. bit. Adventists may not have figured out that the United States is the enforcer for Rome, but I will tell you the radical Muslims knew it. How would they know it? They were on the receiving end of somewhere between 30 and 60,000 missiles and bombs per year. That would get your attention. Huffington Post, look what they say about the Pope. But shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet, and the liberal-leaning Huffington Post was quite willing to endorse him for president of the world. Whoa, whoa. Your moderate left and moderate Muslims love the Pope. Daniel has a 3-way split. The moderates follow the king of the north. The radicals are overthrown. Now let's take a look at some history for a moment. During the Crusades, there was a violent form of Islam, and the world followed the Pope when they needed somebody to rally around. During the Ottomans, there's another violent form of Islam on the march again, and the world united around the Pope against radical, violent Islam. At the time of the end, you get a violent form of Islam on the march again, and who does the world turn to? It's not that hard to figure out anymore who the king of the north is. You know, in our typical prophecy seminars, we go through the history and everything, and although that's right, a lot of people look at it and say, you guys just can't forgive and forget, can you? I do it differently. I just show them what's going on today, and they're going, boy, that's happening all over again, isn't it? Yeah, it is. It's so easy to identify the papacy as the king of the north. And, you know, my last public seminar, got a Catholic guy that's very interested, and he's attending. And he says, how can you really know all this stuff is true? And I said, you read the Bible? He said, you actually read the Bible? I said, yeah, I read it every day. And so I had to explain how he could take it in little bite-sized pieces and start reading it, because as a Catholic, they're not really encouraged to do that. And, you know, he's hearing all this stuff, but this kind of stuff, when they realize, yeah, whenever there's been radical Islam, the world's followed the papacy, he can see it. He can now see it in the prophecy. Now, when I left, he hadn't become a Seventh-day Adventist yet. But what was interesting, he wanted to know how to give my ministry and the local church a donation, and he gave both a large donation. I mean, I have Catholics all the time that are troubled by this, but they're fascinated by it at the same time. And because it's just factual stuff, they're not horrendously offended. And it gets their attention. It's interesting how it works to reach them. And we can be friends even while they're struggling with it. Mass immigration crisis, or migration crisis. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. And yes, friends, the radical Islam broke loose in 2014, and by 2015, we are having an immigration crisis. At first, in 2015, the European politicians were welcoming the refugees with roses and flowers and stuff. A few months, well, about a month later, they're starting to go, whoa, 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 slow down, slow down. And, you know, they're just getting mowed over. And it's only gotten worse since. The king of the South, or the South, is pushing against the North in multiple ways right now. Then, during the 2016 presidential election, you have Trump going on air with Sean Hannity, and he was asked about radical Islam. He said, the point is, they, radical Islam, want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. Well, let's see. If my understanding of Daniel 11 is right, radical Islam gets wiped out like a whirlwind. Very, very swiftly and viciously. Ever been around a tornado? Pretty good description, isn't it? By the way, I have never gotten to watch a tornado on the ground, at least not from the outside. I woke up in the middle of one night, and I looked out my windows. And it was like living in a washing machine, and things were whipping around from multiple angles at different windows. Thankfully, it was a little tornado, but I had trees on my property that didn't grow on my property afterwards. But they're kind of interesting storms. And someday it's really going to hit, and Trump was out to do it. He thought he had, but he failed, which means it's going to be even more intense than what we already saw. In his inaugural address, he said, we will reinforce old alliances and form new ones, and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. I was kind of waiting for that speech, because I figured there'd be something like that in it. He also said something about starting right then, he was going to drain the swamp. He declared war on the bureaucracy. Boy, is that war still going on. Remember 2016? It was an interesting campaign. Wow. Are we ever getting into it this time? Heavy duty already. I mean, we're seeing things that the world has never seen in the United States. As I've often said, we live in interesting times. Jonathan Cahn has a book out about something about the gods. He said, do you ever wish you lived in biblical times? Well, you are. Well, I would. He's got all kinds of vague things to try and make things sound really good. I'm just flat out saying, you are living in what the Bible talked about. We are living in the time of the end. And we're watching this stuff happen. And it's leading up to the greatest evangelistic opportunity in all history. Oh yeah, Some people are focused on trouble and fear and the time of trouble. I'm focused on the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time. Have you ever had your life threatened for doing evangelism? It's fun. When the doors are wide open and Satan is so mad that he resorts to threatening your life, you know he's on the run. And I've had it a couple of times. They are my favorite moments in life. Not for the death threat. That just is off the side. But for what God is doing. Have you ever given Bible studies to people who were literally fighting to stand there and continue to hear the Bible study? Literally fighting with somebody to listen? When people are that interested in hearing, it gets exciting. Well, I better not get off track too far. All right. So, he said he was going to completely eradicate radical Islam. That was his goal. Eventually, it will be done. Egypt and many are overthrown. Will it be Trump or somebody else that does it? I don't know. But as I've said here already, if Trump makes it back in, just remember God sets up and he takes down. And if he comes back in, he will come back in with a vengeance, with a score to settle, and you are going to live through the wildest times this country has ever known. And that's probably true if any Republican wins, because they'll all try to get even for Trump, unless it's Christie. So what happens? In December of 2017, Trump said the U.S. Embassy will be moved to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Do you know what the problem with that statement is? Where does radical Islam want their capital? Do you expect them to be happy or angry? Within a week, 6 days later, there's a meeting in Turkey where all the radical Muslims are really mad. Now remember, Erdogan wants to be caliph, so he's hosting the meeting. Here's one of the things that gets said. Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. You know where the Al-Quds force is from? That's the Iranian special forces, basically. Why would the Iranian special forces be called the Jerusalem force or Al-Quds force? Because they intend to take Jerusalem and make it the capital of the Muslim world. And so Soleimani is the commander of that. Oh, the other issue here is Iranians are Shiite, Palestinians are Sunni Muslims. But he just agreed that they're ready to support them, and they have been supporting them now with money and weaponry. One other thing I want you to notice is how the media will steer you the wrong way while technically telling you the truth. Is there any hint that Al-Quds and Jerusalem are the same place? Nope. But they could tell you, well, we put it there in the article. But you didn't know Al-Quds and Jerusalem are different names for the same place, and they don't bother to tell you. This is why the world doesn't really know what's going on. So, yep, they're ready to really push back. Then the Iranians start putting out propaganda pictures, and I just love their pictures. This is Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, and he's got a radio in his hand. He's just called in a strike. He claimed to have something like 1,000 or more terror cells in the United States. So he's just called in a strike on where? The White House. And you see the bomb going off on the roof, or an explosion. The U.S. flag is falling. It says, "We will crush the USA under our feet." And Donald Trump lived on the second floor of the White House at that time. Take a look at that window to the right on the second floor. See the smoke coming out of it? That's Donald Trump's living quarters. What do you know about Donald Trump? Will he want to get even? How would you like to be Soleimani? Yeah, you can't be. He's dead. Who had him killed? Trump did. Then the Saudis come out and explain why they're not following some other Muslims. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil, along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. This is the green light for the Abrahamic Accords. If you're wanting to establish a caliphate by force, you're a part of the evil triangle. There is no need for a caliphate by force in today's world, according to the Saudis. Then on May 14, 2018, about 2 or more years before expected, at first Trump thought it'd be 2020 or sometime like that, before he opened up the consulate or the embassy in Jerusalem. But he opened it on May 14, 2018. Why the hurry? Symbolic date. It's the 70th anniversary of the founding of this nation of Israel. Why is that such a symbolic date? This prototype coin from the Temple Mount group, a temple shekel to pay your taxes with. Look at the two faces on the coin. The guy in the background is Cyrus the Great. After 70 years of captivity, he said, "You can go back, Jerusalem is yours." As a result, they end up rebuilding the temple. After 70 years of statehood, Trump says, "Jerusalem is yours." And they believe they will rebuild the temple. One little issue. Ever been up on the Temple Mount? I've been up there, and I've been in the Dome of the Rock and the mosque that's up there. By the way, those are the issues. It's World War III if you do anything up there, like build a temple. Did I say we live in interesting times? They're ready to build the temple. Oh, and if you're evangelical, you've heard all about, yes, that there was a rancher in Texas last year that actually bred and has perfect heifers, red heifers. They can now have the sacrifice to establish the temple. They have everything ready to go. It's interesting times. The Vatican and the Gulf have a common enemy. This is the Atlantic. The meaning of the Pope's historic visit to the United Arab Emirates. What has changed in brief is the dual rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic State. The following analysis applies equally to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia. Facing direct challenges, the Gulf states calculated that they could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. If you think back to 9/11, those terrorists, most of them were from Saudi Arabia. At that time, Saudi Arabia was turning a blind eye to radical Islam. Then they realized that the radical Muslims wanted to wipe out the House of Saud as well, the leadership of Saudi Arabia. So they turned against them, and they started beheading radical Muslims in fairly large numbers, capital punishment. That is precisely what they have done both in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The institutional authorities of Islam and the political authorities with which they are aligned have just bought themselves an institutional ally, if not a theological one, Whether the alliance keeps the theological barbarians at bay is another question. The United Arab Emirates signed agreements with the papacy. And what came right after those agreements? The Abrahamic Accords. And so the papacy was very much involved in the swing of the moderate Muslims away from the caliphate group. Iran puts out another picture. And you have ships on fire and sinking. And they're all flying American or Israeli flags. And you take a look. What's the focal point? It's not the ships. It's the Dome of the Rock. Why are they attacking the U.S. and Israel? Well, they want Al-Quds, Jerusalem. But look at the water. It's not water. It's a Palestinian headscarf. Why are the Shiite Muslims helping the Sunni Palestinians? Because they want Al-Quds. Their pictures are worth 1,000 words. I have more of these propaganda pictures, but that'll do. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed. That was the caliph. They just put a new caliph in his place. He got killed. They put a new caliph in his place. He's been fairly invisible. Somehow I don't think he wants to follow very quickly the previous two. But the Islamic State is functioning south of the equator now in Africa. They're not gone. Erdogan, another form of radical Islam, he wants to reestablish the caliphate. Iran, probably the most dangerous of the group at this moment, probably, because you're never quite sure, wants to reestablish the caliphate. So we're not out of caliphate wannabes. Radical Islam is on the march to make Jerusalem its capital. Then on January 3, Trump had Soleimani blown to pieces, literally. A drone strike outside the Baghdad airport. Iran was furious. And they said that they were going to strike the United States directly with Iranian weaponry from Iran. You see, they normally strike the United States through proxy groups so that it can't completely be traced back to them. Everybody knows, but yeah. This time they said, we're going to do it personally. And Trump said, not a good idea. If you kill one American, we're on. Just know that if you kill one American, there are 58 missiles already programmed with Iranian targets. They include military targets, cultural targets, and religious targets. Does anybody notice something different than typical U.S. targeting? U.S. targeting tries hard to only have military targets. Trump included cultural and religious. In other words, he said, if you want a holy war, we'll have it. Whoa. And the world should have been holding its breath if it wasn't. And the Iranians attacked U.S. military bases in Iraq and Syria with missiles from Iran. Would anybody die? On January 7, Drudge Report, which is just has headlines from around the world, the leading headline was, "It's war." There were newspapers already saying the U.S. and Iran were at war. Because how can you attack U.S. military bases with a barrage of missiles and not kill anybody? And so these were just all different things going on that night. "50 to 100 Americans were so close to the bombs going off that they got concussions. But nobody died. That's a pretty good feat. Be close enough to give that many people concussions, but don't kill anybody. I have one explanation for it. In Revelation, it says there are 4 angels holding back the winds of strife until God's people are ready. Do you know what the sad part of that is? The reason we're still here is we weren't ready. Everything was ready to go for Daniel 11 in January of 2020. And it went right up to the, literally brink of the edge. And God stopped it. And Trump held fire because nobody died. Was 2020 going to be a memorable year? Do you know what normally happens? If God has to hold, it's going to get more complicated and worse. Did the Muslims change? No. Still in January, up by the Dome of the Rock at the mosque, Siam can be seen telling the enthusiastic crowd that 3 prophecies would soon be fulfilled, that the rightly guided caliphate will be established, and here's one, because it's the Jerusalem Post that doesn't call it Al-Quds, it flat out says Jerusalem. That Jerusalem will be liberated and established as its capital, and that Islam would achieve world domination. Oh, and when the Muslims control the world, there will be peace. Because anybody who disagrees will be dead. That's their goal, if you're radical. By the way, moderate Muslims don't like radical Muslims for a very simple reason. There have been more moderate Muslims killed by radical Muslims than Christians killed by radical Muslims. At least in the Middle East. All right? So, moderate Muslims have a target on their backs as well because they're not radicalized enough. Then COVID-19 hit, which you probably remember. And the threat of radical Islam disappeared. Or did it? Or did it just disappear from your news feed? If I have taught you nothing else, it is doubt what you're being told. Study, look around at multiple sources. Get it from more than one angle. Get it from more than one country. In June of 2020, I did one of my rare presentations because in June of 2020, not too many churches were open to have presentations being done. And I just went online to Jihad Watch, and you can go there, and you can find out the terror attacks and stuff that have been going on in the last couple of days. It's something like, it's between 40 and 50,000 terror attacks with fatalities since 9/11. They've got a counter down there on the right side of the page counting away. Oh, and some of those attacks have had 1 to 2,000 people killed in them. It's not the number of people killed, that's the number of fatal terror attacks. It was interesting. Burkina Faso, Muslims murder 58 people in attacks targeting Christians. This was that one day. Red-green Twitter storm to America. Burn, baby, burn. Red-green Twitter storm? Red meaning Marxist socialist, green meaning Muslim. And all of a sudden, you can look up Red-Green Alliance, and you're going to find two definitions. Red, Marxist Socialist, green, environmental, or red, Marxist Socialist, green, Muslim. What was happening? The George Floyd riots were on. And radical Muslims were working really, really hard to make the George Floyd riots more violent. The next one will explain it more. Philadelphia, Muslim cleric, which is a preacher, says demonstrations are useless, fighting and bloodshed are needed. He's talking about George Floyd riots. A Muslim lawyer, a lady, I believe it was Philadelphia, took a firebomb and threw it into a police car during a Black Lives Matter protest riot to turn it more violent. It does kind of heat things up when you blow up a police car. Those kind of things were going on. Oh, at that time, there were Black Lives Matter protesters that went over to Israel to protest with Palestinians, and Palestinians were joining Black Lives Matter demonstrators in the U.S. It was just, and all of a sudden I started wondering. In the previous books, you can go back and read that I thought the power out of Revelation 11 was a temporary replacement for Islam. And I started wondering, and I went back to the text and looked. And no, it comes up in the second woe and moves into the third woe. It is more of an ally than a temporary replacement. Crisis Magazine at that time in 2020 noticed it too. They're conservative Catholics. Not since the Cold War have we experienced such violent political, cultural, and spiritual unrest. Not since the Civil War has our country been divided so bitterly against itself. Our civilization is under attack from the far left within and radical Islam without. Oh, the Catholics even recognize what's going on. But it was in prophecy to start with. And this is just a list that I went over yesterday. Both radical Islam and radical left hate Israel. They both hate capitalism. They both hate traditional Christianity. They both hate American exceptionalism. They both hate conservative politicians, and they like the same kind of guys like Soleimani. They both use social justice, but yeah, the Muslims get a pass on the LGBTQ part. But the bottom line is they all think that Jesus was just a good man, but not God. And that the Bible is just a book and not your authority for life. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Radical left and radical Islam have the same enemy. It's kind of like the United States and Russia during World War II. We were allies. We were helping each other. And when Germany fell, what did Patton say? He said, let me just turn the corner and head towards Moscow. It'll be a lot easier now than later. And he got fired for saying it. He was right. But it was not politically correct to have said. The United States and Russia went from allies to enemies in the Cold War. Still not doing that great. The radical left and radical Islam are allies because they have the same enemy. But if you got rid of traditional Christianity, radical Islam and the radical left would now go to war with each other. It is an alliance only held together by a common enemy. Said another way, both look at the other as their useful idiot. I mentioned it yesterday. Voice of the Martyrs. List restricted or hostile countries. You can get their prayer map or their prayer journal and pray for these countries. It looks like this, if you want to look at one of them. 32 Islamist countries are restricted. That means the government restricts Christianity. 15 where the government just looks the other way and lets their people persecute Christians. Sometimes it's worse to be in a hostile than a restricted one. So that's what? 47 countries where it is exceedingly dangerous and difficult to be a Christian. Marxist, socialist countries, 11 of them. All other countries combined with different situations, only 4. So by far, it is the Marxist radical Islam countries that are attacking traditional Christianity. Oh, we do definitely have a King of the South alliance, folks, that's attacking the King of the North. Biden wins the election, that emboldens radical Islam. At the moment, he's trying to work out another nuclear deal with Iran. It must be really bad because he won't let anybody see it. He won't let even Democrats in Congress see it. That must be really bad. But it's emboldening Iran, that's for sure. Terror slaughter. ISIS fanatics behead 50 men and boys on Mozambique football pitch before chopping them up and kidnapping every woman. By the way, the boys were more fortunate. Pentagon ramps up attacks on resurgent ISIS. It is not defeated. Well, Trump wasn't right on that one. Nigeria, Muslims murdered 3,462 Christians in the first 200 days of 2021. And they're on track to do the same thing again. How would you like to live in a country that's probably about the size of Washington and Oregon combined and have 2,000 to 3,000 Christians killed every year just because they're Christian? Every year? And 2021 was worse than normal. The Stream, a conservative Christian news site, put out this article, Christian Nationalism or Gay Sharia, there really is no option C. Interesting title. It's talking about monkeypox. You see, in New Orleans, they have a party in the summer. It's called Southern Decadence, where the homosexuals gather together, usually between 200,000 and 300,000 of them. Pretty good sized party. And the sexual activity is very high. Monkeypox was starting in 2021, and it was mostly being spread in homosexual gatherings. And the CDC couldn't find their voice to say this is not a good idea. However, the year before, they could close churches down and say they shouldn't be open. Why? Because the left is attacking Christianity and supporting the King of the South, Marxist, socialist, radical left, and radical Muslim. Now that's an interesting setting, but take a close look at that title. Christian nationalism. We either have to make this a Christian nation or it's going to be gay Sharia. Gay Sharia. What do Muslims do to homosexuals? They kill them. But they're just pointing out that you have a radical left, radical Islam. It's going to go that direction or it's going to go Christian nationalism. We've got a pendulum situation here, folks. And it says there is no option C. I'm here to tell you there is an option C. It's called the center. C. You can go with the King of the South and radical left, and the pendulum's over there right now. But that pendulum has already started to come back. And it's going to be swinging over here to the right, and they're the ones that are going to tell you you've got to follow traditional Christianity. Radical left, radical Muslims aren't going to tell you that. It's going to be the radical right that will tell you that. And so that pendulum, and by the way, a pendulum, a big one, is called a wrecking ball. And it's going to come swinging through. What are you going to do in the middle? Are you going to stand up and try and stop it? King Josiah tried that when the king of the south was on his way to attack the king of the north. Pharaoh versus Babylon. And Pharaoh said, "Get out of my way. I'm not coming to fight with you. I'm going after the king of the north." And Josiah stood in his way and got killed needlessly. That should be an example for us today. So here's my recommendation. When the pendulum swings, duck. It's not your fight. Your challenge is to love everybody on all sides and love them for Jesus Christ. Be careful. Taliban's 20-year victorious alliance with who? Radical left, radical Muslims. It's been going for a long time, folks. And the fall of Afghanistan, man, that empowered radical Muslims and radical left all over. Putin probably would not have invaded Ukraine if it wouldn't have been for Afghanistan. And now you have China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Ukraine. And you've got the United States and Europe, NATO, King of the North Alliance, and the papacy will soon be in charge of that. Because you're about to see some really bad problems. ISIS went ahead of plotting an attack last summer on former President Bush. That was stopped. Israel and Iran, 5 minutes to Armageddon. Jerusalem's planning must anticipate Hezbollah, Hamas, and other Tehran-backed militias aggressively responding in kind if Israel launches a raid into Iran. In all likelihood, before Israel's air forces could return to Israeli airspace. Massive volleys of rocket fire would be hitting the country from Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria, and possibly even from Iran itself. Almost guaranteed that as well. Striking Iran's nuclear facilities would be only the beginning, not the end of a hot war between Israel and Iran. Prepared or not, Israel and Washington both appear to be out of time. Iran's threat is substantial, and it is only intensifying. Until now, Jerusalem's war between wars covert approach against Iran was sufficient to tactically frustrate Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Read Stuxnet and other things that they did to computer virus that made all their centrifuges explode, spin out of control. It no longer is. That's a key phrase. Measured in doomsday clock terms, it is 5 minutes to midnight in Jerusalem and Tehran, and in Megiddo, the historical biblical site of Armageddon in Israel. By the way, if Israel and Iran go to war, it is not the Battle of Armageddon. That doesn't happen till the end of the plagues after the close of probation. We have another conflict before then. It's the king of the south, king of the north fight over Israel in the Middle East. Netanyahu returned to power in December of 2022. He's got a coalition that lean hard right and want to be able to offer sacrifices on the Temple Mount. But the Israeli left has gotten in a fight with him over the Supreme Court. How would you like a Supreme Court that nominates their own replacements? In other words, the Supreme Court can control everything and you can't change it. There is no way to democratically change it because they nominate their successors. And so it's a really interesting fight going on. And as people from the West, we think of our own Supreme Court and we don't think of it in the terms of theirs, and theirs has some real issues. But anyway, All Israel News, unprecedented joint military exercise tests U.S.-Israeli readiness against Iran, the largest drill with Iran against Iran with the United States and Israel. That happened in January of this year. Now, I want you to notice, while the United States, I've got several stories that come in 1 week's time here. While the United States and Israel are practicing an attack on Iran, there is a news story released. Stakes rise as Iran can fuel several atomic bombs. Iran has enough highly enriched uranium to build several nuclear weapons if it chooses, the United Nations top nuclear official is now warning. But diplomatic efforts aimed at again limiting its atomic program seem more unlikely than ever before as Tehran arms Russia in its war on Ukraine and as unrest shakes the Islamic Republic. A couple of days later, the United States and Israel have just finished their joint exercise, and Israel decides to send some drones into Iran to blow up a weapons factory. Of course, Israel doesn't claim responsibility. They say, no comment. But boy, that sure was a nice fireball over there, wasn't it? Kind of idea. Hours after the report, Iran intensified its threats against Israel despite pretending the attack had failed. U.S. four-star general warns of war with China by 2025. That was all news stories within 1 week as we began the year. Here's what baffles me. If you are an enemy of the United States and the West, wouldn't it be a good time to attack right now? Because the West has used up all kinds of ammunition in Ukraine. And the stockpiles are running low. I mean, Russia is really having trouble too. But if you're China and you want Taiwan, why not do it while the world's all tied up with Ukraine? If you're Iran and you want Jerusalem, why not do it? And if you're in either of those, and you think a Republican administration will win the next election, you're going to need to do it when? Very soon. Our world is on such a shaky foundation right now. Have you noticed I'm not really looking sad about that? Because that would indicate that maybe the angels are going to let the four winds of strife go for either one of two reasons. One, God's people are ready. Two, it says God will cut it short. He may not wait too much longer anyway. He may let it go ready or not. Because he said he does cut it short. That means it didn't go, something didn't go all the way like he wished it would. He has to cut it short. And it might be he's getting tired of waiting for his people. China and Russia encourage Iran to go nuclear. That's about a month ago. Yeah, if Iran goes nuclear, boy, China and Russia can really divide and conquer the West, can't they? The impending Thermidor reaction in Jacobin America. Does that title make any sense to you? It's because you don't know your history of the French Revolution. They're looking at the French Revolution. It goes swinging one way against religion and Christianity, and then it comes back. At peak woke, our reign of terror is beginning to lose momentum because its continuation would destroy all the work of 247 years of American progress and sacrifice. LA Dodgers will honor drag group mocking Catholic Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. You followed that story any? The Dodgers will give the group a Community Hero Award. Well, that came out, and there was a backlash, and so the Dodgers uninvited the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Then there's a backlash from the left, and the Dodgers re-invited the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. By the way, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence are a group of drag queens or whatever, and they dress up as nuns, and they do all kinds of sacrilegious stuff. So they just had the event, and there was a large group of Catholics and Protestants out in the parking lot protesting. but it's beginning to show something. We've had Pride months over and over again, haven't we? By the way, Christianity gets Easter, Christmas, a couple of days. If you're a president, you might get one day. If you're LGBTQ, you get a month. Kind of interesting. The backlash is on this year, and it has to do with mostly the transgender movement. It's like it's just pushed it one step too far, and the country's going, no more. Destroy the role of parents. Karine Jean-Pierre, Biden's spokesperson, gets angry reactions for saying children belong to all of us. How are you going to feel if a politician looks at your kids and say they belong to us? White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has drawn angry reactions for commenting that children belong to all of us at an award ceremony held by the Gay and Lesbian Alliance against defamation. Jean-Pierre made the comments during an interview with what magazine? You get an idea that this could be anti-Christianity? I mean, just their words are really claiming it. At the 2023 GLAAD Awards, weeks after President Joe Biden said, "There's no such thing as someone else's child. Our nation's children are all our children." She was advocating for children to have increased access to sex change operations, procedures which are banned or restricted in many countries. President Biden actually said it would be a sin to not make sex change operations available to minors. But a recent survey found that 7 in 10 Americans believe there are only 2 genders. That means 3 out of 10 Americans are creating this chaos. And if you're outnumbered 7-3, and you get the 7 really mad, who's likely to win? The 7. The pendulum has begun to swing. Social conservatism in the U.S. highest in about a decade. The last time this many Americans said they were social conservative was 2012. The survey comes at a time when many states are considering policies regarding transgender matters, abortion, crime, drug use, and teaching of gender and sexuality in schools. The increase in conservative identification on social issues over the past 2 years is seen among nearly all political and demographic groups. The pendulum has stalled and is beginning to come back. So you've got overreach and backlash. Radical Islam, radical left will go down, moderate will follow papal-led Christianity, and right there where it says tidings or the loud cry, that's Daniel and Revelation's way of saying you get the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time. The world is brought to its knees by catastrophe and war. It's predicted in the Bible, and we can look at it and point everybody and say, look, we're living through what the Bible predicted 2,500 years ago. It has never missed a detail, and it is about to close, and you better come to Jesus now. You can come to Jesus, be free of sin, be free of fear, and live in this crazy world with an expectation of you're getting out of here soon. That's good news. And huge numbers will come in while huge numbers are leaving. But more will come in than leave. Are you ready? The pendulum has begun to swing. The king of the south and their allies have pushed against the king of the north, and the king of the north has about had it. The Pope, he's a little wishy-washy. But the people, Protestant and Catholic, they're about finished. Daniel 11:44, but news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. East, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, God's remnant from Islam. North, out of Babylon, God calls a remnant in Revelation, doesn't he? God calls his remnant together to take a stand against the king of the north. And in Joel 2:28, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. Just before Jesus returns, a lot of dream and vision activity. And folks, it's happening. I, and as I've said, others in this room have talked to many Muslims who have had those dreams and visions. And that's going to happen just before Jesus comes. And it's happening. Daniel 11, it's all happening. And if you're waiting for a Sunday law, you're sound asleep while it's happening. I would say study Daniel 11 and be ready. It's happening. Michael stands up. That's the close of probation. You have deliverance and resurrection and eternity with God. It's got a pretty good ending, doesn't it? The interesting times are about to get really good when Jesus rescues his people. Well, so let's just leave it there. King of the North, the papacy with the political right end up versus King of the South, radical Islam, and the radical left. God's people get caught in the middle, but only Jesus saves. All right, I'm just barely over time, and I'm going to wrap it up. If you want to hear Ellen White and Daniel 11, you need to be here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We'll talk about that. There's not a lot of it, and I'll take questions then too. I wish I could now, but there's something about a break that I'm supposed to give you. So let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for giving us a chance to live in interesting times. And Lord, help us to understand these interesting times and totally give up trusting ourselves and totally trust in you. Fill us with your Spirit. Give us assurance through Jesus and his salvation. In Jesus' name I ask it. Amen. Want information about how they have this in your church, you can grab some of these brochures up here.